Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and today I'm going to read the last chapter in my first book, chapter 15, in Seven Sisters, the Voyage. Now that the sisters were restored in numbers, President Hart signaled for the pilot to take off, and he, Bramble, and Tippets boarded the barge. The saints were overjoyed to be moving on the water again. They didn't mind that they were uncomfortably crowded together. Most had handheld baggage, a leather valise, carpet bag, or sack stuffed with necessary traveling possessions. They either balanced it on their laps or sat on it to conserve room. Their large trunks and boxes were on the luggage barge, which had left the loading dock some time ago. As their barge was pulled out into the river, the saints thought about their native lands and where they were ultimately going to Zion in the west. They couldn't help but start singing. Israel, Israel, God is calling, calling thee from lands of woe. Babylon the great is falling, God shall all her towers o'erthrow. As they rounded a bend in the river, the saints pointed at what they knew could only be their destination, Castle Garden Immigration Depot. It was a large round structure jutting out into the bay as if it was a drum floating on the water, but it was connected to the shore by a wide bridge-like pier. The sisters stung with excitement as they strained to get a better look. The twins kept standing up, but were pulled back down by Susanna, who was conscious of the admonition for everyone to stay seated to prevent accidents. "So this is Castle Garden," exclaimed Caroline. Phoebe was disappointed. "I don't see a castle," she said. Fanny finished her sentence. "And I don't see a garden," she complained. Lavinia was quick to set them straight. "Brother Careless told me that Castle Garden was once a famous opera house. All the upper crust came here for operas and concerts." Susanna added, "You can tell it was once a beautiful structure." "With thousands of immigrants trailing in and out, that tends to wear on things," said Eleanor. Castle Garden was indeed once a beautiful structure. It was first built as a military fort to defend the city of New York during the Napoleonic Wars. But when it was decided that it had no more military use, it was ceded to New York City, remodeled, and renamed Castle Garden. Its central parade ground was decorated with elaborate flower gardens and artistic shrubbery. It was a grand place and became the setting for concerts, fireworks, balloon ascensions, and other extravaganzas. As the sisters followed the line of saints entering the round building, they could hear the din of talking in the distance, which caused great anticipation for what they would find on the other end of the long hallway. While they were waiting for the slow line to move forward, they were captivated by old souvenir posters of past cultural events at the garden, which lined the hallway and were behind protective glass panels. Alinda May pointed at one poster and surprised the others by saying, "Jenny Lind." "She's beautiful," admired Phoebe. Fanny read from the poster, "The Swedish Nightingale." Alinda May smiled. "I heard her," she said shyly. "Where?" asked Caroline eagerly. "Copenhagen Opera House. Heavenly." Studying the posters, Lavinia marveled. "These are posters of her debut concert in New York City on September 10th, 1850. 13 years ago. Welcome, Sweet Warbler," Caroline read. "Managed by P.T. Barnum." "She must have been something," Eleanor sighed. "It says here that 30,000 met her ship." "First of 100 concert tour to benefit Jenny Lind Charities," said Susanna, reading another poster. Lavinia was fascinated to learn about Jenny Lind. She had heard her name before, but didn't realize just how famous and celebrated she was. She stood with her mouth open and then read, "Mendelssohn declares her to be one of the greatest artists who ever lived." That's quite an endorsement. "Her voice cannot be distinguished from the flute, but was an improvement on it," read Caroline. Eleanor was impressed. "Once held a note for 60 seconds. "I wished I could have seen her," said Phoebe seriously. Fanny was quick to say, "Why would you want to do that when you can listen to Lavinia?" "Why, thank you very much, Fanny," said Lavinia, "but I certainly don't compare to her." Well, if she's the Swedish nightingale, Fanny said thoughtfully, you're the English sparrow. When the sisters finally rounded the corner, they were thrust into a huge round room under a massive dome supported by tall, ornate pillars. What was once a stage on one side of the room was now held a number of desks for Castle Garden employees. There was also a large rostrum in the center of the stage where a general information officer gave instructions to the immigrants through a megaphone. Where 6,000 seats once circled the stage, there were now wooden benches and noisy immigrants everywhere, at least 3,000 of them moving around, standing in lines, sitting on benches, or sitting in groups on the floor. Large letters of the alphabet, suspended from the ceiling, helped the immigrants stay in their assigned areas. Around the outside of the benches, against the walls, were various stores or offices where immigrants stood in zigzagging lines. There were money exchanges, railway and steamship ticket offices, and provision stores, among others. President Hart, who was still in charge of the Saints until they made it through Castle Garden, announced through his megaphone, "Brothers and sisters, please move to the area that they have designated for the Amazon passengers under the letter J." The Saints moved steadily toward the empty benches there, passing hundreds of immigrants who were tending their families. Many appeared to be poor. As the Saints walked along, they heard many different languages and thick accents being spoken. The Saints smiled and nodded and were sometimes met with a friendly greeting, but mostly they were growled at or ignored. When they got settled on their benches, President Hart made a welcome announcement. "I have made arrangements for some of the Saints in New York City to provide you with a lunch of rich, sweet milk, new bread, and good fresh butter." The Saints started to salivate at the mention of such long-anticipated foods. They looked at each other in disbelief, but with thoughtfulness that they would soon receive something other than ship's rations. Thankfulness, not thoughtfulness. Let me read that again. They looked at each other in disbelief, but with thankfulness that they would soon receive something other than ship's rations. They didn't have to wait long before 20 or so women came in with large baskets of bread, and 20 more men brought cans of fresh milk. The Saints were emotional as they received their 2 slices of bread thickly slathered with butter. They gratefully held out their tin cups to be filled with the sweet nectar they hadn't tasted since leaving their home in the British Isles. The 7 sisters sat together and savored each bite of their buttery sandwiches. It was pure bliss to taste the wholesome richness of each sip of milk. Phoebe murmured as she chewed, "This bread is so good, but it's a little like eating wind." Fanny chimed in, "Especially after gnawing on hardtack for 44 days. When they finished eating, the Saints made their way to the men's or women's bathrooms, where rows of sinks and towels lined each wall. There were bathing areas with 20-foot tubs that had continuous running water in them. There the immigrants would clean themselves and their families. The sisters thought it was truly refreshing to wash with water that wasn't black, slimy, or didn't have the drying effects of salt in it. Even though the water was dreadfully cold, they all enjoyed a good, thorough cleaning. When they finished washing their hair, the sisters dried their long tresses with the small towels provided and walked back to their temporary home under the dangling J. "I feel 5 pounds lighter," exclaimed Lavinia. Soon the ward presidents walked among the Saints under their charge and collected their British money so they could convert it into American currency at the money exchange office. They were careful to write down each amount and by whom it was given. With his ward's money in a leather pouch, President Tibbets made his way to the exchange booth, where he was the first of the presidents in line to lay down his gold and silver. "I need to exchange $300 worth of British pounds into greenbacks," he said. The money exchanger counted out greenbacks until he reached $150, and then he stopped. Tibbets was aghast. "Only 50 cents on the dollar, sir?" "The draft riots dropped it 25 cents just 2 days ago," the exchanger barked roughly. "You're lucky it hasn't dropped lower." President Tibbets knew he wasn't going to get more money from this rude, abrasive man, so he disappointedly gathered up the bills and relayed the bad news to the presidents waiting in the line behind him. He returned to his ward just as the information officer announced that their company should go to the registration lines to register their names according to the law. Many of the thousands of immigrants that moved through Castle Garden each week took the opportunity to Americanize their names right then and there. It was just simpler that way. Johann became John. Margaretha became Margaret. Westmoreland became West, and so forth. The baggage inspection was next. The Saints were in 10 different lines as agents searched through their luggage for contraband or anything for which they could charge a tariff. In the process, the sisters got separated. Caroline and Linda May were far behind the others and had to wait in the line long after the others had returned to their holding area. Moving forward at a snail's pace, Caroline finally reached the head of the line, only to face a gruff immigration agent who searched through her carpet bag. "And what do we have here?" he said sarcastically, as he unwrapped a linen napkin from a blue Wedgwood plate covered with delicate white designs. Linda May peeked out from behind Caroline to catch a glimpse of him unwrapping a second plate. Caroline smiled and rocked back and forth on her heels. "They're a present from me Nan, from my man." Okay. Caroline smiled and rocked back and forth on her heels. "They're a present from my Nan," she said with pride. The agent's face was granite. "These dishes will cost a tariff of $1 apiece." Caroline was flabbergasted. "But there are 16 pieces. That's almost more than they cost." The agent smiled smugly. "That's the tariff, ma'am." Caroline choked up. "But I don't have 16 cents, she said, trying to gain sympathy. The agent was getting irritated and spoke with some force. "You have a choice of leaving your goods in the hands of the United States government or paying the assessed charges." Caroline was getting frantic. "But they're priceless keepsakes," she said, half crying. With a stern voice, the agent repeated with emphasis, "You have a choice of leaving your precious keepsakes in the hands of the United States government or paying the assessed charges." "What am I to do?" she said, half to herself, wiping tears. "How can I give up my only link to Nan and England?" After a moment, Linda May stepped to her side and announced, "I'll pay." Caroline looked at her incredulously. "You understood all that?" Linda May went on. "I'll pay," she said, "if you feed me on your dishes in Salt Lake City." "Oh, Linda May," cried Caroline, "you are heaven sent. Thank you so much," she said, hugging her tightly. Linda started to walk away. "Be back," she said as she made her way to the women's bathing area. Caroline turned to the agent. Can you give me just 5 minutes?" He looked unyielding. "Please," she begged. In exasperation, the agent finally relented. "You'll have to go to the end of the line," he said, half enjoying sending her there. Caroline turned and looked down the long line. It had taken her almost an hour to get to the front, and she realized it was going to be another long wait, but she was so thrilled to have found the money she needed that she announced, "Gladly, I'd love to." In the meantime, Linda found the dressing room where she stepped behind the curtain. There she lifted her skirt, then her petticoat, and felt along the hemline until she came to something round and hard. She took a small knife from her pocket and unpicked enough stitches to squeeze out a silver piece, then 3 more until she had 4 sovereigns. She would help her new sister Caroline. She had to have someone indebted to her. She was all alone in the new world, without a husband, and with a baby on the way. She needed to be able to rely on someone. After a long day at Castle Garden floor, the Saints prepared to spend the night there. They hoped they would finish their inspections and registrations early the next morning so they could begin their overland journey to Florence. Captain Larkin posted guards all around the perimeter of where the Saints would sleep because he had been warned about the possibility of thievery by the more unscrupulous immigrants on the floor. The guards would keep watch until the Saints slept. The 7 sisters found a spot where they could all lie down together with 3 on one side and 4 on the other, their heads together in the middle. This way they could chat for a while before settling down for the night. As they lay on their stomachs, resting on their elbows, Phoebe giggled. "I don't know if I can sleep without being rocked to and fro all night." "I'm enjoying being so still," said Fanny, "but I didn't know the floor could be so hard." Lavinia chuckled. "Get used to it, sisters, because we'll be sleeping on the ground for the next 3 months." I've heard that crossing the Atlantic is far more dangerous and frightening than crossing the plains in covered wagons, said Caroline. I hope that's true. Susanna sighed. It seems so wonderful to get off the Amazon with its horrible stench. I just can't comprehend that we are in America, Eleanor said. England seems like a distant dreamland. Alinda lay on her side, propped up on her elbow. And Denmark, she said, as tears formed in her eyes because of her double loss. Caroline patted Alinda tenderly on her back. I wonder what will become of Lizzie, said Susanna. Alfie has stuffed her up with golden promises, said Lavinia. I just hope he doesn't let her down. Eleanor seized the conversation. Let's all promise to stay together until we get to Utah. Nobody else will come between us, she said, slapping her right hand down on the floor in the middle of the sisters, who each put their right hand on top of hers. Sisters, she said as she slapped her left hand on top of the stack. The others followed her lead until all their hands were in the middle like layers of hotcakes. Then they all replied together. 7 sisters, said Alinda May, one beat behind them. 7 sisters. She trailed with her quaint accent, causing them all to laugh in merriment. As the night wore on, the immigrants moved from their benches to the floor so they could lie down. The once noisy room got quieter as crying babies and children eventually fell asleep and bickering immigrants grew too tired to squabble. The sisters gradually dropped off to sleep, beginning with the twins, until they were all sleeping soundly, except Lavinia. She was too excited to sleep. She had said many silent prayers of thanksgiving that day. She was in America, and she was off the Amazon, and she had a new family she dearly loved. As she tossed and turned on the hard floor, she finally sat up and looked around at the thousands of immigrants sleeping there. Then she looked up at the raised stage and contemplated what it must be like in the garden's halcyon days. She envisioned Jenny Lind center stage in a white satin dress with yards and yards of ruffled skirt held out by a spectacular hoop, her bodice adorned with jewels and ribbons, and her corset pulled tight to emphasize her small waistline. Her chestnut brown hair pulled back and falling in a mass of tight ringlets down to her shoulders, framed her face perfectly. Jenny would smile sweetly as she looked out at her audience in the 6,000 seats surrounding the stage. There would be hundreds of admirers standing in every space available, and more devotees outside clamoring for tickets to hear her sing. Then, as if transported to another time, Lavinia slowly got up and made her way across the room, weaving in and out between the sleeping immigrants. As she paused by Brother Careless, he stirred and opened his eyes. He could see that she was moving toward the stage, and he watched as she ascended the steps and walked to the center, in front of the rostrum. He subsequently reached for his violin case, which he had been using as a pillow, and opened it up. Lavinia dreamily looked out at her audience of sleeping immigrants from every country. She had never witnessed so much faith and hope. She saw families huddled together, dreaming of the life they would soon have in the country that welcomed them, no matter how poor they were. A smile crossed her lips as she quietly began singing. I know that my Redeemer lives. What comfort this sweet sentence gives. He lives, who once was dead. He lives, my ever-living head. As she approached the chorus, George stood up and joined her on his violin. Her eyes found him, and she smiled as her pure angelic voice gained strength. He lives to bless me with his love. He lives to plead for me above. He lives, my hungry soul to feed. He lives to bless in time of need. Her voice and the violin obbligato blended perfectly. They sounded breathtakingly exquisite together. Soon there were a few on the floor who raised their heads to see who was singing and playing music at 2:00 in the morning. When they saw there was a woman on the stage and a man playing the violin halfway across the room, they listened for a moment or two and were soon caught up in the magnificence of Lavinia's soul-piercing voice and the lilting strings of a master violinist. As she sang the next verse, some of the immigrants sat up to listen. Some hummed or sang along, and some cried at the splendor of what they were hearing. Lavinia could see smiles from the immigrants and saints who were awake. The people before her were from all nations and all walks of life. They had come to the land of the free, many of them forsaking all. They couldn't help but make America a stronger and greater place. Eleanor soon woke up and nudged Caroline, Alinda May, and Susanna to join her for this once-in-a-lifetime concert. The twins slept peacefully through it, however, as the sisters sat with their arms around each other. They had put their faith in their Heavenly Father and His Son, Jesus Christ, and had gained a testimony of the truthfulness of the gospel for which they left their homelands. They were spellbound as Lavinia sang. He lives to silence all my fears. He lives to wipe away my tears. He lives to calm my troubled heart. He lives all blessings to impart. Tears were now streaming down Lavinia's face, but her emotions didn't hinder her singing in the least. She came to the last verse with pure power and control. He lives, all glory to His name. He lives, my Savior, still the same. Oh, sweet the joy this sentence gives. I know that my Redeemer lives. Most of the adult saints were awake now and felt the spirit that the beautiful music brought into the vast room. Eleanor was overcome with emotion now. As she reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter Aunt Lucy had sent her, she tipped the letter towards the faint light coming from the nearby lantern and scanned the words through her tears until she came to the line, I hope you will be here in time. Then, pressing the letter tightly to her bosom, she sobbed silently as she prayed and listened to the glorious music that was surrounding her with love. He lives, all glory to His name. He lives, my Savior, still the same. Oh, sweet the joy this sentence gives. Then, with all the passion she could express, Lavinia, along with thousands of other immigrants in Castle Garden that night, sang the last line of the hymn together. I know that my Redeemer lives. The end. Let me read the epilogue. In 1863, when the Amazon brought 800 saints across the Atlantic under President William Bramall's leadership, it had the reputation of being the luckiest of Western ocean packets. In 1864, the Amazon's luck ran out when she was reported burned at sea. And that's the end of my book, Seven Sisters, The Voyage. I hope you enjoyed it, and you can order it at Amazon.com if you'd like to read it for yourself or give it for a gift. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it. Over and